Hello and welcome to Business Daily. Live from Seoul, I'm Shin Se-min in for Ji-yoon, and we begin with the day's highlights. This time, it's the IMF that has cut the growth outlook for Korea this year, nudging it below the 3% mark, in line with projections from many other institutions. The ongoing influence peddling scandal engulfs Samsung and its heir apparent Lee Jae-yong, who faces the risk of arrest. What does this mean for the world's largest smartphone and chip maker? The IMF has joined local and global financial institutions as well as the Korean government in downgrading its growth outlook for Asia's fourth largest economy. It has cut the forecast for Korea below the 3% mark for this year. Kim Hyo-sun has the details.
In its World Economic Outlook Update report released on Monday, the International Monetary Fund forecasts a growth rate of below 3% for Korea this year. Without going into further details of how much it adjusted the forecast, the IMF explained that Korea was one of the countries that had their growth outlooks revised down. In the organization's report last October, it forecast Korea to expand 3% in 2017. The IMF's latest move is in line with major global and local financial institutions that have slashed Korea's outlook to the mid-2% range. The Korean government also expects Korea to grow 2.6% this year, the same as the OECD, while the Bank of Korea has given an outlook of 2.5%. The latest outlook trim from the global body further fuels concerns of sluggish growth this year in Korea that's already reeling from uncertainties at home and abroad, like the ongoing political turmoil and trade protectionism. By contrast, the IMF report includes upward revisions for countries like Germany, Britain, Japan, and Spain, citing their better-than-expected growth at the end of last year. The exact growth outlook for Korea and other countries will be released in April. Kim Hyo-sun, Business Daily.
Korea's finance minister says the government will pull out all the stops to stabilize climbing grocery prices ahead of the major Lunar New Year Seoul holiday. During a meeting with the ruling Saenuri Party on Tuesday morning, Yoo Il-ho said the government would double the supply of fresh produce and projected skyrocketing egg prices will stabilize sometime next week with the release of extra import eggs and stockpiles. Seoul recently imported eggs from the U.S. to mitigate the effects of the nation's worst ever bird flu outbreak, which has sent egg prices skyrocketing. Minister Yoo also added that the government will work to maintain a stable supply of electricity and gas and work with consumer groups to monitor price fluctuations of processed foods. Heavy attention will be on UK Prime Minister Theresa May on this Tuesday as she delivers a speech on the country's plans to exit the EU, which look likely to confirm it is headed for a hard Brexit. After months of pressure to provide a detailed blueprint for the transition, May's office says the Prime Minister will not push for a deal that leaves Britain, quote, half in, half out of the European Union. While laying out the country's priorities, May will outline the UK's plans to pull out of the bloc's single market and regain full control of Britain's borders. These expectations have pushed the pound to the lowest levels in more than 3 decades and weighed heavily against European stocks as well. The FTSE 100 ended a 14-day winning streak and dropped 0.2%, while Germany's DAX index and France's CAC all dropped over 1% at market close on Monday. The poverty rate of Korea's elderly with sources of income has reached an all-time high. According to data from Statistics Korea, the central bank, and the Financial Supervisory Service, almost 62% of seniors aged 65 and older with an income from work or personal assets were living in poverty in 2015. The figure is up 1.5 percentage points from the previous year and is the highest since related record-keeping began in 2011. When combined with government pension and other sources of public income, the poverty rate was at 47%, nearly 15 percentage points lower. Experts say in order to lift more seniors out of poverty, the government will need to shoulder a heavier financial burden. Samsung Group's heir apparent Lee Jae-yong is facing the possibility of arrest, putting Korea's largest company on edge. So a Seoul court is due to rule on the warrant on Wednesday after it completes its review of prosecutors' findings. We'll discuss the implications of this with an expert later, but first, Eunice Kim catches us up on the widening corruption probe.
In a stunning turn of events, Korea's prosecutors have requested a warrant to arrest Lee Jae-yong, the heir apparent and vice chairman of Samsung Electronics. It's the first time the top leader of the country's most valuable company is facing arrest. The 48-year-old's own father, Lee Gun-hee, had walked away with suspended sentences and later presidential pardons after being found guilty of bribery in 1996 and tax evasion in 2008.
The Special Prosecutor's Office, in making this decision to seek an arrest warrant, determined that while the country's economic interests are important, it was more important to uphold justice.
If approved by the courts on Wednesday, the younger Lee would be arrested on charges of bribery, embezzlement, and perjury. The independent counsel team probing the sweeping scandal centering on President Park Geun-hye and her confidant Choi Soon-sil believes Samsung siphoned a combined $36 million indirectly to Choi in exchange for her support to smooth out the controversial merger of Samsung C&T and Seoul Industries that would ultimately solidify Lee's leadership. On Monday, the head of Korea's National Pension Service, Moon Hyung-pyo, was indicted for allegedly abusing his power to support the 2015 merger, despite the millions of dollars in losses it would hand NPS, not to mention minor shareholders. During questioning last week, he admitted that the $36 million had indeed exchanged hands, but he contended it was a donation made under heavy pressure, not a bribe with expected returns. That's a stance Samsung Electronics stood by on Monday as it expressed shock at prosecutors' decision to pursue an arrest, adding it looks forward to a, quote, good judgment from the courts. As Korea's largest company scrambles to deal with its latest hand of challenges, experts are split on the direction the country should take. Some say the aggressive accountability should continue to uproot a decades-long tendency to favor Korea's wealthiest chaebol. Still, others worry that a country without a political leader can't be helped by having a vacancy at the helm of the company responsible for a lion's share of Korea's economic growth. Eunice Kim, Business Daily.
And to tell us more about this, we have Professor Yang Jun-seok from the Catholic University of Korea, who joins us in the studio today. Glad to see you here today.
Happy to be here.
So Samsung plays a huge role when it comes to Korean economy. And just yesterday, after the special prosecution announced it would request an arrest warrant on the heir apparent Lee Jae-yong, Samsung Electronics stocks tumbled over 2%. It's not something that we normally see that often.
Well, I would tend to discount whenever you have shocking news like these, the stock price movement for the first and second day. It dropped, as you said, a bit more than 2% yesterday, but it seemed to be recovering somewhat today. But whenever you have something like this, you initially have a big shock effect, and then as things work out, it tends to stabilize, and then we can see the real effect. So I would wait a few more days before whether we see how much real effect it has on Samsung stocks.
And also, Samsung Group had previously promised that it would roll out its investors with a blueprint for creating a holding company structure by May this year. But with this variable we're waiting on, how much would this impact Samsung's plans on changing its structure of governance?
Okay, well, I would expect it to be delayed. The way that Samsung usually works is that, well, sort of routine operations go well even without the leader. But the medium and long-term strategic decisions, those are usually made by the chaebol owners or at least approved by them. And if Lee Jae-yong is occupied with this trial, then he's not going to be able to approve these plans, obviously. So I would expect those strategic plans to be delayed, and some decisions on, well, Samsung's been making a lot of M&As to acquire technology. I expect those to be slowed down. I expect the corporate governance governance reforms to be slowed down. And then there's some possible lawsuits that might come in from the stockholders who lost money from that merger deal that was just in the report. So as long as those things are still being worked out, and as long as Lee Jae-yong is still in his legal problems, I expect those strategic decisions to be delayed.
So delay in overall schedule for Samsung Group as well. But what kind of overall impact would this have on Samsung Group and its global reputation?
Okay, as far as the operations are concerned, as I mentioned before, the routine operations will go well. As far as the brand image is concerned, whenever we see sort of a corruption trial like this, not only in Korea but in other countries as well, if the corruption took place in your own country, then the brand image suffers. But if it took place in another country, then it doesn't seem to affect brand image that much. So because the corruption took place in Korea, I would expect the brand image in Korea as well as demand in Korea to fall. But internationally, I don't really expect it to affect it that much. In fact, I think the problem with the batteries of Galaxy 7 Note will probably play a larger role in determining global brand image than the anti-corruption.
Of course, we'll have to wait for the results to see how this all unfolds on Wednesday. But what kind of risk might this present to Korea's private sector and its economy in general?
Well, Samsung is the biggest company, and it's responsible for about 20% of the exports, and its domestic sales are about 23% of Korea's GDP, so it cannot help but have an effect. But I think much more problematic is what's going to happen with some of the other chaebol leaders who are under accusation right now. If all those leaders are placed at this type of legal risk at once, then I think we'll see some paralysis in some chaebol firms because other chaebols have leaders have a really hands-on management style, much more than Samsung. So those chaebol groups may be affected more than Samsung.
Now, taking a step further, what do you think in the long term? What long-term impacts could be should this were to continue? And would this lead to a potential overhaul in the governance structure of Korean conglomerates in a larger perspective? Okay,
well, traditionally, even when these type of problems occurred, nothing really happened that much. There's been a slight tweaks here and there, but nothing fundamentally has really changed. I think in terms of chaebol reforms, you need a three-pronged reform. The first is management reform. If the family is managing the companies well, then you don't really have a problem. But if the families are not managing the companies well, if they're misusing the company for families' gains rather than stockholders' gains, then you really need some kind of mechanism to replace the management. And that's not happening in Korea because there's a popular opinion that chaebol companies, even though the chaebol families may be minority stockholders, they own the company. So they're very reluctant to change the management, and I think that makes them quite bold in cases like this. Second reform you need are competition policy reforms. I think a lot of chaebols use their market power to keep the competitors down and steal their IPRs. So we need a stronger competition policy so that smaller firms can become larger firms, and IPR protection so that their IPRs are not stolen by chaebols. Third reform you need, and I think this was really emphasized by Choi case, is transparency reform. There's a lot of pressure on chaebols to do things like nationally desirable R&D, corporate social responsibility activities, and chaebol, because they're the largest economic powers in Korea, they have the most of the ready cash. Politicians have really been pressuring them to do more socially. And this Choi case showed how that can be abused. So I think there needs to be a transparency reform so that whenever, say, politicians or bureaucrats meet with chaebol officials, especially concerning these CSR activities or whether they're trying to get an agreement on, say, regulations, that needs to be transparent. Whatever meetings they have should be, their schedule should be revealed, what they talked about should be revealed, and who they talked with should be revealed so that we have a less chance of abusing the CSR, like what we saw in the Choi case, and have really socially desirable R&D or CSR activities by the chaebols.
So you're saying we would have to wait and see whether these influence peddling scandal would directly hamper the process of the governance structure change in Korean conglomerates.
Right. What I see right now is people trying to punish the jabbers, and I think that's certainly necessary because you need really punishment that stings for jabbers to refrain from these activities. But you also need good institutional framework, and partially because they're concentrating on punishment right now, and partially because I think the politicians themselves, once they get into power, want to use the same type of informal channels. They're sort of ignoring the institutional reforms that they need, like the transparency reforms. And I think that is crucial if we're going to avoid something like this in the future.
Thank you, Professor, for your insight today.
Thank you.
That does it for us on this Tuesday, January 17th, and tune in again, same time for tomorrow's Business Daily. Thank you for watching.